Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're heading back to the ancient Mediterranean. It wasn't just, a cradle of civilization, it was this intense political laboratory. Really fascinating stuff. And we're focusing specifically on Magna Graecia. That's Greater Greece, the Greek colonies way down in southern Italy and Sicily, starting around the 8th century BCE. Our mission today, to really get under the hood of the political model that dominated these places, oligarchy. We've been digging into sources, looking at analyses of places like Croton, Sybaris, Taranto, trying to figure out how this kind of concentrated power popped up, how it stuck around, and, why it became the go-to system out there on the frontier.
Right, and that's the core question for you listening. What made these oligarchies special? Because, we often picture ancient power as just simple tyranny. But here, in Magna Graecia, these were actually pretty calculated, very adaptive systems. It wasn't just about who had the most money, though that was part of it. It was driven by the hard, practical needs of, just surviving on a pretty dangerous frontier. So we'll explore how that elite control wasn't only about hoarding power, but also about keeping things stable when, frankly, chaos wasn't far away.
Okay, let's lay that groundwork.
Well,
Why did Greeks even pack up and leave for southern Italy back then? What was the push?
it was that classic mix, really. Back on the mainland, populations were growing, land was getting scarce. That's the push.
And the pull.
The pull was huge. You had political exiles looking for a new start. Then there was the land itself in southern Italy, incredibly fertile, lots of potential, plus opportunities to trade with the local Italic peoples were just opening up. Big commercial draw.
And they didn't just settle anywhere, did they? Location was key.
Oh, absolutely not random. They were very strategic. They needed good natural harbors for trade, obviously, sites that were easy to defend, and, crucially, access to that rich farmland.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's why the really big players, Croton, Sybaris, Taranto, they ended up controlling the best coastal spots and the most fertile plains. Prime real estate.
And I suppose being far from mainland Greece, that gave them a bit of freedom, politically speaking.
A huge amount of freedom. That distance was a gift, in a way. They brought traditions from home, Sparta, Athens, Corinth, wherever, but they weren't rigidly bound by them. They could experiment, adapt those traditions to the rough and tumble reality of frontier life. And that environment really encouraged these unique sort of self-made oligarchies to emerge.
Okay, so if they're kind of starting fresh, how did power get concentrated so quickly, just into the hands of a few families? Where did the oligarchy actually start?
It starts right at the beginning, the moment of colonization. Think about who financed the whole venture, who organized the ships, who led the initial, often dangerous settlement.
The expedition leaders, the wealthy families?
Exactly. Those initial aristocratic households, the oikoi, they immediately stake their claim on, three critical resources.
Which were?
Okay, first, the best farmland, absolutely essential. Second, control over the trade routes and commerce networks that brought in wealth from outside.
Right.
And third, control over religious stuff, the temples, the priesthoods. So by controlling land, money, and religious legitimacy, they basically locked in their authority economically and spiritually right from day one, tied it to their family names.
Okay, I see. They were like the founding shareholders of the city-state, basically. But wasn't that risky? Shutting out everyone who arrived later, didn't that just create this potentially unstable underclass?
Oh, it was definitely a gamble, a huge risk. But the payoff was power that was concentrated and, crucially, predictable. The whole system was designed to keep itself going. Wealth, influence, they stayed within those founding families because political participation was deliberately cut off for later arrivals, sometimes for generations. Citizenship wasn't something you earned, it was something you inherited.
Right. So we really need to break down the social ladder for you, because understanding who was kept out is just as vital as knowing who was in.
Absolutely. So at the very top, you have the gamoroi. That literally means land shares. These are the descendants of the original colonists. Full political rights. They sat on the councils. They led the army. They were the state.
Okay, the top tier.
Below them, you find the perioikoi. Now, these were free people. They could be merchants, artisans, maybe farmers who arrived later. They lived there, paid taxes, probably served in the lower ranks of the army.
But no political voice?
Exactly. No citizenship, no say in how things were run. And then way down at the bottom, holding the whole thing up economically.
The laborers.
The helots and various enslaved populations, mostly agricultural workers, no rights, no legal standing at all. And those elite gamoroi families kept their grip tight through intermarriage, consolidating land and power, making sure only their names showed up in the corridors of power generation after generation.
What's so interesting, though, is that even with this basic elite structure, these oligarchies didn't all look the same. They developed differently, didn't they? Depending on the place.
That's right. You get these different flavors of elite rule, really shaped by local conditions and what the founders prioritized.
Let's dig into some examples, starting with Croton. This one's different, the philosophical oligarchy. Sounds a bit strange.
It is strange and fascinating. Around 530 BCE, the philosopher Pythagoras shows up and sets up his school there.
Right. Pythagoras, the triangle guy.
The very same. But his school wasn't just about math and mystical beliefs. The sources suggest it became deeply political. The inner circle of his school thinkers, mathematicians, scientists, they effectively became the ruling council of Croton. Seriously.
Yeah.
So philosophy wasn't just abstract thought. It was like their operating manual for government.
Pretty much. They tried to implement Pythagorean ideas, harmony, proportion, order, discipline into city law, the economy, even how they laid out the city streets.
How did that work in practice?
Well, harmony meant things like strict public discipline, communal meals, maybe even shared property among the elite, but also, importantly, really organized, rational infrastructure projects. Think advanced water systems, strong defenses, things that required coordinated effort, reflecting that sense of order.
Okay, wow. Now let's swing completely the other way. Sybaris, famous or maybe infamous for luxury, total excess. This sounds like an oligarchy all about wealth.
Sybaris is the perfect contrast, yeah. Forget Spartan austerity. Their stability was purely based on incredibly efficient trade and specializing in very specific high-value goods. The oligarchs there controlled huge amounts of fertile land. Yes, the Crathis Plains produced a lot, but the real money came from monopolizing things.
Like that expensive purple dye. Exactly like the purple dye. They controlled the whole process, cornered the market. That centralized wealth far more effectively than just owning farmland. And they cemented this power by marrying strategically, linking up the richest families until they were basically one big, impenetrable business network.
The stories about them are wild, aren't they? Like inventing the chamber pot because they couldn't be bothered to walk, banning noisy crafts so they could sleep. It says a lot about an elite totally insulated from everyday life.
It really does. It's kind of the ultimate example of economic power leading to political, well, maybe indifference to anything, but maintaining that wealth. But then shift gears again and look at Toronto. Totally different focus.
Toronto. That was the Spartan colony, right? Founded by the Parthenai.
That's the one. The Parthenai, traditionally, the sons of unmarried Spartan women. So they came from this background where military skill was absolutely everything. That heritage shaped Toronto completely. The whole society revolved around military excellence, discipline. The top families were the military leadership.
So unlike Sybaris, status wasn't just about money. It was about being a warrior.
Precisely. And it wasn't shared. The ruling families provided the city's famous cavalry essential for fighting the local tribes. You didn't just inherit land in Toronto. You inherited the duty and the exclusive privilege of being an elite cavalryman. Military prowess was the ultimate status symbol.
Okay, and one more major example. Syracuse. This was the powerhouse, right? On a massive scale.
Syracuse is like the textbook case of aristocracy hitting the big time. The Gameroi there controlled enormous estates, worked by dependent labor, generating huge wealth. And their power was supercharged by geography. They had this incredible natural harbor, plus a nearly impregnable island fortress that let them dominate Sicily, influencing, sometimes bullying, their neighbors, just massive regional power.
All right, so we've seen these different flavors, philosophical, wealth-driven, military, large-scale aristocracy. But let's pull back. What are the common threads? What's the basic DNA shared by all these oligarchies?
Okay, number one, definitely. Exclusivity. Power wasn't open to just anyone. It was strictly limited to that inner circle, usually landowners or big merchants, who could trace their family back to the original founders. Citizenship was about birth, not merit.
Got it. Exclusive club.
Number two, continuity. They were obsessed with keeping power within the group. Strategic marriages, carefully managed succession. You see the same family names popping up in records for centuries in places like Metapontum or Lockery. It was all about stability for them.
And third?
Third, they were adaptive, really pragmatic. They used whatever their local advantage was, trade for Toronto, land for Sybaris, but always, always protecting their exclusive grip on decision-making. Adapting economically gave them the resources to maintain that political control.
But let's stress again, this wasn't just about elites lounging around. They were under intense pressure, weren't they?
Yeah.
The practical demands of living on the frontier actually required this kind of tight, centralized control.
This is so important to grasp. These rulers weren't just collecting taxes for fun. They were managing incredibly complex operations under constant threat. Think about the local populations, the Oskans, the Lucanians.
They wouldn't have been happy about the Greeks showing up.
Not at all. They saw it as an invasion, and rightly so. So the Greek cities faced constant external threats. You couldn't just disband the army when it was time to harvest the olives, which meant maintaining permanent militias, building and maintaining massive city walls. This stuff costs a fortune and requires serious organization. Systematic taxes, labor duties, and even the richest families had to contribute. This needed strong central coordination. Only the elite could really provide that.
So they also had to be amazing project managers, essentially.
Yeah.
Juggling all these demands of farming the big estates, getting labor for walls and irrigation, making sure enough men were available for the army without collapsing the economy. How did they manage that without constant riots?
Well, Croton, with its philosopher rulers, apparently had quite sophisticated systems, maybe rotation systems where different groups had to provide labor for certain tasks, military, public works, harvests at specific times.
So the ruling class wasn't just claiming power. They were actively positioning themselves as the essential organizers, the only ones who could handle the complexity and keep everyone safe and fed.
That was certainly their justification. The implicit message to everyone else was, we provide the order and defense you need, challenge us, and this whole fragile system falls apart, and then where will you be? It's a powerful argument, especially on a dangerous frontier.
So bringing this all together, what's the big takeaway for us? Looking at Magna Graecia, it seems like this concentration of power, this oligarchy, wasn't always just naked ambition. It often grew out of sheer necessity defense, managing resources, creating stability where there wasn't any.
Exactly. And the influence, it echoes down through history. You can definitely see traces of these ancient council structures, this idea of restricted membership based on wealth or status in later political systems, even aspects of modern ones. And think about how they managed power within the elite, the ways they tried to balance things to stop one family getting too dominant. Those internal checks prefigure things like coalition governments, or even how corporate boards try to manage powerful egos.
And those fundamental arguments about what makes rule legitimate, is it divine right, military strength, economic success, those debates were being hammered out right there in these dynamic, exclusive city-states. So the oligarchies of Magna Graecia really show how exclusivity and concentrated power could be, maybe even had to be, functional tools for turning vulnerable settlements into powerful, lasting states.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. If these ancient elites developed ways to check power among themselves to prevent internal tyranny, basically, how does that history inform our own debates today about concentrated wealth and power? Especially when the justification of frontier necessity is long gone. Who gets to define legitimate rule, and how are they held accountable now? Something to think about.